So my name is Maïa Fourt. Thank you, Yassine, and thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. I have previously worked on the evaluation of the ECAP roadmap, on the implementation of this roadmap, and the proposition of elements for a renewed ECAP roadmap, as well as with SPIRAC on seafloor thematics and climate change impacts on GES assessment. Through this presentation, I would like to invite you to focus on how climate change can affect assessment of marine environmental state. Are there elements of monitoring programs that should be reconsidered taking in account climate change impacts? So that's the question. I really will go rapidly across. As we know, the ecosystem approach was agreed on by the CPs in 2008. Its implementation was planned in 7 steps at regional, sub-regional, and national level. And currently, the ECAP roadmap is it's being evaluated. It has been evaluated and maybe will be reconsidered. Within the ECAP roadmap, we have the Integrated Monitoring Assessment Program, IMAP, which is really the tool to evaluate if GES, good environmental status, has been attained. It's defined by ecological objectives, indicators, targets, baseline values, GES definitions, etc. It is to be integrated at regional, sub-regional, national level. And some elements of IMAP are still to be defined, as we saw yesterday with the ecological objective 6 and 4. Within the Mediterranean Sea, there are 2 frameworks for monitoring the Mediterranean Sea. We have the MSFD and IMAP, and although they are not identical, they are well in line one with the other. So why should we consider climate change impacts now? Well, in fact, currently, as Tatiana has said, the MSFD is under updating process also, as well as ECAP and IMAP. And in fact, within these frameworks, the climate change impacts were not specifically integrated. So, and also there is a work that has been done within the Abiomed program on the state of, state of the art regarding available information on GES and the effects of climate change on other cumulative pressures and its determination. So I think it's really important now to answer this question: should the climate change concerns be integrated in the renewed ECAP roadmap and IMAP? And if so, why and how? So climate change impacts. Well, as we know, they are due to the increase of greenhouse gases, in particular CO2, due to anthropogenic activities. And this increase in CO2 in the atmosphere leads to acidification of the sea and changes in sea chemistry. The increase of atmospheric temperatures also, which is due to climate change, increases sea temperature, but also the frequency and intensity of marine heat waves, which in turn increases mortality events, installment of invasive alien species, changes in current circulation, and increase of sea level. And these increases of temperature in the sea and the atmosphere lead to extreme climatic events, such as storms and floods and droughts, which will impact littoral habitats, especially with erosion or acute pollution events, and increase in turbidity and salinity variations. So this was a quick reminder. Simply to illustrate some of the impacts of climate change on GES assessment in the Mediterranean, I will focus on Atlantic habitat assessed within IMAP, which is Posidonia oceanica meadow. The presentation will feature certain difficulties that are encountered in GES assessment and inconsistencies that exist within the current IMAP definition. Posidonia oceanica meadows is assessed within IMAP through the ecological objective 1, biodiversity, and the 2 indicators on habitat, distributional range, and habitat extent, and the second one on the condition of the habitat's typical species and communities. For Posidonia oceanica, the parameters that are assessed are at different levels. At population level, we will have parameters such as habitat extent, lower and upper limits, density of shoots, percentage of coverage. At plant level, we will have leaf surface, the state of the apex. Physiological and cellular level, we will have nitrogen, phosphorus content, trace metals. And community level, we will have the epiphytes that cover the biomass. These parameters are used in ecological indices, which should indicate if we are in GES or not. Other than climate change impacts, the Posidonia meadow undergoes other anthropogenic pressures, such as a nutrient discharge from sewage or agriculture or other elements, sedimentation, erosion, industrial pollution, which leads to turbidity, eutrophication, and pollution, which impacts the meadows. Another pressure is the anchoring, which in fact creates openings in the mat, which later develop with the currents. And in some areas, we also have still fishing impacts by shallow benthic trawlers, for example, which deteriorate the condition of the habitat. If we have a look at the known climate change impacts on Posidonia oceanica, first, it's known that the sea is a carbon sink. Between 1994 and 2007, the increase of CO2 in the sea represented 31% of the global anthropogenic CO2 emissions over the period. So the sea incorporates big quantities of CO2. Considering Posidonia oceanica, it leads to an increase of available CO2 for photosynthesis, which is rather a good point. The acidification of the sea will lead to a decrease of epiphytic calcareous cover. And concerning the seedlings, there's an increase in resource and carbon storage. So acidification on its own, of course, further research is needed, but seems to have rather positive effects on Posidonia. If we have a look at the increase in sea temperature and the marine heat waves, well, there the impacts are negative. The seedlings, for example, and seeds will have an increase of mortality, of leaf necrosis, of susceptibility to grazers, and a decrease of respiration. At the plant level, we have a plant leaf necrosis and rhizome biomass that decreases. However, it seems that sexual reproduction increases under higher temperatures because warming induces flowering, sexual reproduction, which increases genetic recombination, favoring adaptation. But now, if we add acidification and temperature increase, in fact, the global effects are negative. With it, at the plant level, we have a decrease of photosynthetic performance and of the plant growth. Some other impacts of climate change on Posidonia. Through the increase of sea temperature, we have changes in species diversity of the ecosystem with installment of thermophilic alien species that can be predators or competitors. There are mortality events, for example, Pinna nobilis, that was part of this habitat, has practically disappeared from the Mediterranean. Sea and atmospheric temperature leads to extreme weather events we had seen, and the wave action, erosion, and turbidity impacts quite a lot the littoral habitats of Posidonia. It is often quite difficult to untangle the impacts of different pressures on ecosystems. However, some works have shown that marine heat waves exacerbate negative impacts on Posidonia oceanica of excessive ammonium and nutrient concentrations and eutrophication, and exacerbates also the accumulated impacts, which leads to a reduction of Posidonia extent and a deterioration of the condition. These changes seem to lead to genotypic composition changes in genotypic composition population. Under cumulative impacts, Posidonia oceanica is declining. Certain authors talk about during the past 50 years in the Mediterranean Sea, it is estimated that 13 to 50% of the meadow has disappeared for certain authors, 34% for others. And the projections under worst climate change future scenarios estimated by 2050, which is only in 25 years, Posidonia oceanica could lose over 70 or 75% of suitable habitat. Here is an example, and we can find quite a few maps like this, of cartography of Posidonia between 2010 and 2015 in the Gulf of Saint-Tropez in Marseille, in France. The green represents the Posidonia oceanica that is alive between 2010 and 2015, and the brown is a dead mat that has remained. The red part, as you see, is a loss, in fact, of the Posidonia oceanica, live Posidonia oceanica between 2010 and 2005. And here it represents 107 hectares, which is, of course, a lot. Well, what is the role of climate change in Posidonia oceanica decline? Again, it's quite difficult to untangle, but several authors indicate that sea warming and acidification affect negatively Posidonia at plant level, that Posidonia populations are unevenly sensitive to thermal stress. It depends on the depth and of the spatial areas, that thermal stress exacerbates the impacts of other stressors. And models, as we see, indicate that the extent of the habitat is expected to decrease under climate change in the future. So coming back to the assessment, if we have a look at the just definition of the ecological objective 1, biological diversity is maintained or enhanced, the quality and appearance of coastal and marine habitats and the distribution and abundance of coastal and marine species are in line with prevailing physiographic, hydrographic, geographic, and climatic conditions. So they are supposed to be in line with prevailing climatic conditions, which are currently changing very quickly. At the indicator level, for indicator 1, just is defined as a habitat distributional range and habitat extent is maintained. And the same for the condition, it should be maintained. There appears here, thinking about what we have seen on Posidonia, an inconsistency in the definitions between being in line with climatic conditions and at the same time have extent and condition maintained. So at the indicator level, when you talk about the habitat extent that is maintained compared to what, it is important to define these baselines because, of course, or reference state, what we take as a baseline? Is it the first assessment? Is it an assessment in a protected area? Is it a modeled assessment, a model of ideal situation? So this is an important, frames need to be defined here to be able to compare and define GIS. Also, if we consider that habitat extent is maintained, this means that there is no negative deviation from the reference state that is accepted. If we look at Posidonia habitat for this first indicator, the target at regional level is clearly not attained. And we can even ask ourselves, is GES reachable for this habitat in such conditions and with such definition? Also, we have to keep in mind, as it has been said yesterday, that there is a close link between EO6 indicators and EO1 for the habitats. And EO6, the propositions that have been done indicate that there could be there could be a percentage of loss of the habitat that could be tolerated, as it is in the MSFD. So we have to keep this also in mind. Concerning the condition that would be maintained, the condition of the habitat, with climatic change, we will have installed invasive species that will probably or are already probably impacting certain habitats. And also, it would be important to assess associated biodiversity because typical species of habitats undergo massive mortalities. As we already said, we have seen this for Pinna nobilis, for example. So some suggestions for thought is that definitions need to be clarified in terms of method and defining GES, baselines, etc., taking in consideration current and projected climate change context. And also certain parameters assessed could be reconsidered in light of climate change context. Further, associated biodiversity, including perhaps some vagal fauna that interact with the habitats, could be assessed. This would also be more consistent with the ecosystem approach and the massive mortality events that we see currently. And last but not least, it seems important that GES targets should be reachable in climate change context. So they need to be maintained reachable. Another question that we can put on the table is, should an ecological objective on climate change be proposed? Some reasons for considering adding an ecological objective on climate change within IMAP is that climate change impacts marine ecosystems in the Mediterranean, that is clear. All other anthropogenic impacts are assessed within IMAP, so why not climate change impacts? And it could be based on indicators that already are defined and could be perhaps a little bit adapted to better answer this question of climate change. But there is a possibility, and it should be considered. Perhaps the decision would be that there should not be another ecological objective, but it's the moment to consider it, I believe. Yes, so all these frameworks of monitoring programs are in process of being updated. So it's really the moment to consider making propositions from the contracting parties to adapt monitoring programs to climate change context. We could reconsider further defining targets of the indicators in light of climate change, as we had said, and consider integrating or not an ecological objective on climate change. Perhaps a workshop on integrating climate change in impacts on impact would be of interest to discuss these points more specifically. Thank you very much.